critical appreciation. Critical appreciation of an anxiety. Okay, this is the poem of A.K. Ramanujan. A.K. Ramanujan, who was an Indo-Anglian poet. And for the examination, this question is very, very important. Critical appreciation or critical summary or critical analysis of the poem An Anxiety composed by A.K. Ramanujan. So now it depends on you that what kind of headings or points you choose or you prepare for the exams. Now the very first heading can be taken just like this, depend on your choice. You can take the very first heading as an introduction or A.K. Ramanujan or A.K. Ramanujan as an Indo-Anglian poet. Okay. So first of all, if you like, you can write few points or few lines related to the poet of An Anxiety, A.K. Ramanujan. Then come to the title to your poem An Anxiety. You can tell anything about an anxiety that has been described by the poet A.K. Ramanujan. Means you can introduce this word an anxiety into your own words. What do you think of an anxiety? But first of all, introducing an anxiety as an anxiety is a 23rd poem of A.K. Ramanujan. Means A.K. Ramanujan's first collection of poems, and the collection's name was The Striders. It was published in 1966, and An Anxiety, this poem is 23rd poem of that collection of poems, The Striders. So in this way you can tell about this poem. And an anxiety is just like a frustration. We can say that A.K. Ramanujan has chosen a very modern, a very contemporary topic for his poem. It is a frustration of contemporary time which forced Ramanujan to write about this word, and each and every one is aware of this word an anxiety. An anxiety, no doubt, it kills human talent, human versatility. Oh, an anxiety is very powerful because it can take everything from you that is your, even your willpower, your confidence, and the power to think anything, to make any decision. It is just like a negative, okay, not positive. An anxiety is a negative outcome of complex. So in this way you can write that life situations, and it produces unrest, restlessness. Means sometimes it becomes very difficult for us to express our thinking, our views based on an anxiety. We know very well what is an anxiety, but it is so meaningful that it is sometimes it becomes very difficult to express it. So in this way you can tell what do you think of an anxiety or what kind of experience you have, but in short, because this topic is very, very important, and it is a present topic also, contemporary topic also, and most of the youth is going through this. So Ramanujan, the poet, he had tried his best to project this topic and to present its face, substance, nature, state of an anxiety. So through this poem we come to know what he has expressed or what he has found what an anxiety is. Then come to the thought. What is the thought of this poem, an anxiety? No doubt it is an anxiety is, it is a state of mind. Okay, according to the poet A.K. Ramanujan, an anxiety is a state of mind, and in this poem he tells what state of an anxiety, nature of an anxiety, or substances of an anxiety. So an anxiety is a very short poem. It is remarkable for its briefness, for its subtlety, for its seriousness, for its language, use of imagery. And this poem explains the true character of anxiety, which is universal. Means the thought in this poem presented by the poet is universal thought. It is not only Indian thought, or this word anxiety doesn't belong to a particular area, particular country, a particular person, but it is a universal poem. The thought is here universal. So according to the poet, the nature of anxiety is unexpressible. It can never be expressed. So it is indescribable. All things, all feelings except anxiety can be defined very well in a single word, in a straightforward manner, or in a poetic manner also. Through the use of similes and with the help of metaphor, A.K. Ramanujan, he has given his best expressing his thoughts related to anxiety, and for that he has taken the help of figure of speech. So in the first 12 lines of the poem, he tries his best to describe anxiety, and he tells that it is nothing. Anxiety is a state of mind, and through various similes and metaphors, he tries his best, but he fails to sum up, he fails to describe its real nature, because in the end of the poem we don't find any kind of the solution of it. He doesn't seem to give us the cure, the treatment, or what solution is there of anxiety for those persons who are suffering from this. So only that was the failure of A.K. Ramanujan, but because as I have told you that anxiety, it seems very easy because this word is known to all, but when we are asked to define it, to express it, if someone asks you what is an anxiety, so you will try your best to define this word, to express this word, but sometimes you will feel yourself dissatisfied that you are not expressing it to the best point. And the same happened with the poet also. He tries his best to present its nature, its kind, its state, its complexity, but in the end of poem we come to know that he has not given us any kind of solution to this problem. So the thought of the poem, that is and he has also told us that anxiety, it has many forms, means it has many manifestations also, and this is why that A.K. Ramanujan, he expresses that anxiety is not branchless. This word in the poem was very important, because we find here the difference between fear and anxiety, and this thought is very remarkable of the poet when he says that anxiety is not branchless, means it has a lot of branches, it keeps growing and growing, and there is no end of anxiety. So he also tells us that it has no geometric design, means you, as it was said first, that you can never express what anxiety is. So it doesn't even has what geometric design, that it doesn't have any kind of shape. So because it is not branchless, it is just like shapeless, so it is not possible for us to tell what kind of design, what kind of shape it has, means like the curves in a state of happiness. So it has no geometric designs, and it affects, okay, in the thought of the poem you can write very well that it also affects the human thinking, our work, our daily life, our routine, our profession, our business, our study, each and everything is affected by this negative side of anxiety. And somewhere it causes a state of utter hopelessness. You just get frustrated, or you get melancholic, and you get depressed, gloomy, full of despair, and the poet, he himself thought the same. So the nature of anxiety, that was the nature of an anxiety. So, an anxiety is the antonym of hope and cheerfulness, because it may be summed up as a nervous feeling. Okay, when you come to this topic, the nature of an anxiety, no doubt it is an abstract state of mind. So here it is, what kind of feeling is, it is a restless feeling, it is a nervous feeling, and it is always caused by, the reason behind this always, it is always caused by fear, and that something bad is going to happen. We don't know ourselves when and where we keep this negativity or this negative within us, but sometimes we think that no, something is going to take place with us, and that is not positive, that is completely negative, means something bad is going to be happened. So worry, okay, when we talk of the nature of an anxiety, worry and fear are its constant companions. If you are suffering from an anxiety, there will be fear and there will be also worry. Then this poem, An Anxiety, it speaks of the nature of an anxiety, and which is really very hard to describe. A.K.RAMANUJAN, he brings in various metaphors in order to give a clear and accurate picture of this very abstract state of being. He is very well, he is able to describe the state of an anxiety, okay, not only the nature of an anxiety but also the state of an anxiety. Then fear is the main source. A.K.RAMANUJAN thinks that it is fear. An anxiety is not alone, but it always comes with fear, and fear is the main reason, fear is the main source of our all tensions. And this is why that he also describes in this poem fear tree. Fear tree, that is the source of fear, and an anxiety and fear are not exactly the same. There is too much difference between both. Fear is a form of dread. Fear has a shape but not an anxiety. So fear is in a form of dread, whereas an anxiety can have extensions because it is branchless. So an anxiety has extensions but fear doesn't have, and extensions of concern, which can have multiple modes through which it affects the person or the individual. So that is fear, main source of tension. Next point, you can have central theme. Central theme of this poem, that is no doubt an anxiety and fear, means this poem, An Anxiety, it refers to the complex Indian problem. Fear is the source of all tension in this poem as described by A.K.RAMANUJAN, and fear may be because of, there may be so many reasons of our fear. Fear may be because of terrorism, because of communal conflict, because of any problem we are suffering or we are having in our life, in our daily life, and there may be also another reason for our fear. So the problems are because of the lack of individual consciousness, and sometimes it becomes our habit to be always fearful. So there is no limit of fear, and fear creates, it causes an anxiety. So this is the main theme or the central theme. He speaks about an anxiety-less earth. A.K.RAMANUJAN, he wanted to make this earth free from fear, free from anxiety, and this is why that he takes the help of peasants. He uses the word that he dreams of this earth, of this world to be completely anxiety-less, fearless earth, and which is as fresh and beautiful as gaiety of waters. When he uses metaphor, simile, gaiety of waters, and he also gives an example of pigeons. Pigeons are always the symbol of peace. Just as the air brings freshness, the pigeons also stand for happiness. So, central theme. And now beautiful imagery has been used in this poem. Imagery, though imagery used here are by A.K. Ramanujan, are very complex. They are very difficult to understand because most of the imagery are out of our mind, out of our understanding. And imagery, for example, naked roots and secret twigs, invisible pigeons, eloping gaiety of waters, just like this all the imageries are used by A.K. Ramanujan and they are very difficult to understand. So, thematically if we say, okay, if we talk of the theme of this poem, he tries to describe complex nature. Why he uses this complex imagery? Because he tries to express, he tries to present complex nature of an anxiety, that an anxiety is not simple but it is very complex. And if we talk of the idea of this poem, that is ideological development, it uses a number of images from wide range of experience and references of life to elaborate this single theme. It now when we go through all the different imagery in this poem used by A.K. Ramanujan, we come to know that how much experienced, how much learned A.K. Ramanujan had been. Therefore, some of such images are also wakeful in its white snake, okay, white snake that was wakeful and eloping. These words are used by him very well. So, every image used in this poem opens completely or creates a picture in the mind of the readers and compels him somewhere to think hard over his own experiences of life. It is not possible for us to forget all these kinds of imagery when we go throughout the poem. So, imageries are no doubt very rare, very beautiful and very original, but it is also true that they are very difficult to understand because most of the imagery are very complex. Then expressions of the conflict. When we say of the conflict, then we come to know that yes, A.K. Ramanujan, he was just going through the conflict, inner conflict and outer conflict. Okay, inner conflict and his outer conflict, and he expresses, he tries at least, he expresses very well these kinds of expressions in this poem. His expressions of inner conflict and his expression of outer conflict. The poet A.K. Ramanujan, no doubt he was born and brought up in the Hindu way of life, and he has educated himself as a world citizen. So the conflict between the inner and the outer, it forms the base of the core of this poem. So the poem builds harsh images and also soft or tenderness. Means on the one hand, the poet builds harsh images. It has naked roots and secret twigs. But on the other hand, it presents tenderness as, and the air is a flock of invisible pigeons, right? Invisible pigeons. So here we find his inner and outer conflict, that he uses very harsh images also and he uses very tender image also. When he says or talks about roots and twigs, he also talks about the pigeons. So these were his expressions of the conflict. Indian sensibility, our ninth heading may be of Indian sensibility. Ramanujan, he was an Indo-Anglian poet. He was an Indian first, though he preferred to write or he preferred to express his thoughts in English language, but first he was an Indian, and this Indianness can be seen very well in his most of the poems. So Indian sensibility, that he tries to use the best words of his using or his selected language. He paints very well an anxiety in terms of fear. Fear is something that comes out of man's inner self. So Ramanujan, he puts an anxiety in a process of continuity. In a process of continuity, he thinks that there is no end of an anxiety, and it keeps growing, it keeps advancing, it keeps increasing, or it keeps going more and more, or higher and higher. So this is the sensibility of A.K. Ramanujan as a poet, that he explains it indirectly and not directly. Means whatever he has expressed in this poem, that has been said indirectly. Fear is just like a kind of an anxiety. So this is why that he begins with it. The source of all tension is the individual. He explains the issues relating to an anxiety through water, flames, pigeons, and ultimately, in the end, he also confesses, but an anxiety I cannot find no metaphor to end it. And he himself finds that there is no end of an anxiety, or there is no solution of an anxiety. So when we say that he uses these kinds of language, but an anxiety can find no metaphor to end it, we find their autobiographical element, that he has used also autobiographical elements. Means he has we find his personal note as his inner and outer look, his inner and outer conflict. So this poem is also full of autobiographical element. And how we can say autobiographical element? If you go to the text, you will find in the first stanza, in the first few lines, what kind of words he used to express his inner self. It has loose ends, okay, these words, it has loose ends with a note at the top, that's me. When he says that's me, so there are personal note, subjective element, or autobiographical element. So this poem is full of autobiographical note, and he through this poem expresses his own melancholy, his own depression, his own gloomy temperament, his, we can say, his inner fears, or his inner anxiety. Maybe that his inner anxiety, or his inner problems, his inner fears may be there. Poetic qualities. Poetic qualities, there is a lot of poetic beauty, and the poem is written, though this poem is written in free verse, no lines are rhymed with each other, and only internal rhymes are used. But in spite of that, the language of this poem, An Anxiety, is very simple, and most of the words used in it are based on day-to-day life, day-to-day language, or day-to-day words, or day-to-day conversation. But thematically, it develops very well complex phenomena of the nature of an anxiety. Okay, nature of an anxiety, or state of an anxiety. Nature of an anxiety, or state of an anxiety. And for this he takes the help of figure of speech, right? Never forget that A.K. Ramanujan, he expressed himself, and it was not possible for him to describe an anxiety without taking the help of figure of speech. So all these are the poetic qualities of A.K. Ramanujan. And he describes an anxiety, for example, when we say that figure of speech, he has used, for example, not branchless as the free tree. When he describes what is an anxiety, he uses these words, that an anxiety is not branchless as the free tree. So there was used simile and metaphor when he says, and the air is a flock of invisible pigeons, right? Invisible pigeons, there was metaphor, figure of speech, and there was also another figure of speech, personification. Flames have only lungs, water is all eyes. So all these kinds of figure of speech used by A.K. Ramanujan, and that makes perfect his as a poet, and all these are his poetic qualities. But when we come to the end conclusion, it depends on you what kind of heading you prefer to keep here. When you conclude your this question, critical appreciation, you can tell very well that no doubt this poem is something complex, because the imagery are also very difficult to understand, and the title, the theme of this poem is also very complex, and he uses a few words to convey his message, to convey his meaning, and that becomes this poem something very difficult to understand for an average reader, for a common reader, because they will have to take the help of the notes, they will have to take the help of their teacher, they will have to take the help of the background of this poem, what was going through with A.K. Ramanujan. So this poem is difficult to understand to some point, and this poem is short, but it is filled with figure of speech, and this poem is in free verse, but there is internal rhyme. So it shows poet's inner as well as outer conflict. In this way you can sum up your question, okay? In this way you can sum up your questions, critical appreciation of an anxiety. So this was your complete question.